Hi, this is Ron Larson. Welcome to Surge Leadership. If you've been with us the last few weeks, you know that Surge Leadership is a 15-minute talk, really conversation with you to talk about things that I'm learning about leadership, things that have worked, things that I've bombed on, things that have been a little bit of got me to first base, and others that, well, rarely get that home run. And in this conversation with you today, we're going to look at focusing on solutions rather than focusing upon the problem. Here's what I've discovered over the last 2 years of being in COVID, trying to figure out how do we get past it, how do we move through it, how do we capture our former glory, and this is the conclusion I've come to. We're not going back. We're never gonna experience what it was like in 2018 or 2010 or 2002 or 1972. And for you old timers, we're not even gonna go back to 1957, because the fact is, we've got to start making history rather than remembering history. You ever been in those meetings? A lot of pastors get together, maybe business people get together and say, hey, back when, or in those days, or back in, and then they fill in the date. And they're talking about the successes that they used to have, what used to work, what got them through the last time they went through a particular crisis. And we're in such a convoluted, chaotic culture right now that virtually nothing that worked in the past is going to work today. Now, our core competency of doctrine, our core competency of, if you're in business, of your principles, those don't change. But the strategies and the action plans that fulfill those core values or that doctrine, well, everything has changed. And I think by now you know that I'm probably preaching to the choir. So here's my statement I want to make to you today. If you're not looking for a solution, you're focused on the problem. And when you're focused on the problem, all you can see, you know what I'm going to say, is the problem. What you've got to do is acknowledge that the problem is there and then focus on the solution. I think of David and Goliath, that great biblical story, when Saul's army is gathered around and they're talking and they're yelling, and the Philistine is coming out there, the big giant, and he's talking about your mama and all those things, and they're shouting back vulgar obscenities at him. And that was the way they fought wars back then. One guy from your army, one guy from theirs, they battled it out, and really only one person died, and then the other army that lost, well, basically they became slaves to the army that won. Well, Saul's army, all they've been doing for days, perhaps weeks, is talking about Goliath, describing their problem, talking about how horrible it is, who's going to go out and fight this 9-foot guy. And so their whole conversation, all the atmosphere was on Goliath. David comes along, and instead of talking about the problem, he takes on Goliath. And guys, that's what we've got to do as leaders in nonprofit organizations, as a leader of a business, as a pastor of a church. We've got to take on the problem. We've got to own the problem. We've got to make sure that that problem becomes personal. But more than the problem, we've got to go on past the problem and acknowledge what the solution is. In fact, I do this all the time. I'll try 3 things, knowing that 2 of them doesn't work. I just don't know which one will work. And sometimes when you've got a problem in front of you, man, come up with 3 solutions, knowing I don't know which one's going to work, but out of those 3, one of those things is going to work. And I put my time, my effort, and energy in those 3 things, hopefully, and hoping and praying that I get a solution to that problem. I think about phone booths. When I was a kid, first driving back in the 70s, and I remember the only way you could get a hold of mom and dad, or if your car broke down, was to pull into a phone booth. And did you realize that AT&T pulled they quit making phone booths in 1972? That may surprise you. In New York City, and the reason they quit making them was not because people were not using them, although later on cell phones and whatnot, pagers came into being. But they quit making them because in New York City alone, 35,000 phone booths a month were being vandalized. In fact, the average length of time that a phone booth was installed until it was vandalized in Brooklyn, New York, was 48 hours. So they could have focused on the problem. Instead, they focused on the solution, and they moved into a whole different realm. Well, in leadership, you've got to focus on the solution rather than getting absorbed with the problem. Well, how do you do that? How do you stay focused on solutions rather than rehearsing what worked in the past? So let me give you 4 things very quickly today. Number 1, what you focus on follows you. Your feelings always follow your focus. So if I'm focused on negativity, what's going wrong, what's not going right, the people that aren't showing up, the people that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, if I'm totally focused on what isn't happening, I'm going to create a culture of distrust, a culture of negativity. Instead, acknowledging that we got a problem, folks, but saying, I'm going to focus on that which is encouraging, that which builds up, that which moves us forward. I'm going to focus on the team unity that we can have. I'm going to focus on solutions that are possible with the people and personnel that we've got in front of us. You create your feelings by what you're focused on. And as a leader, your focus, while not denying reality, is to focus on solutions rather than always harping about the problem. So here's my question to you right now. What do you need to focus on today, this week, this month, to move forward in progress so that solutions are driving your business or your church rather than your problem? So first thing, what you focus on follows you. Here's the second thing. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. This is a good one because it takes a lot of mental energy to get something started, to begin something. And a lot of energy and effort has to go into moving something that is not moving to get it moving. So I'm always moving. I'm always thinking of, right now I've got ideas for 2025, 2030. None of them may happen, but I'm moving them in case one of them becomes a possible solution to something I'm going through in 2022, I can implement it right then. I've always got parallel tracks, in fact, multiple, 8, 10 tracks going through in my head of possible avenues and pathways that we can move on. If you get locked into one pathway and that pathway doesn't lead you to a provision for your problem, at the end of your problem, without a provision, you're going to lose credibility as a leader because you don't have a provision for that problem. That's a mouthful right there, isn't it? But this is so true. So always stay ready. Always be looking at what you're working on, what you've assigned, what you've delegated out, what you've asked someone to do, and checking back on it. What's the progress? Where are we with that? What's the next? If you're dealing with a particular staff member, what's your next step in moving that project forward from the last time that we talked? Always staying ready so you don't have to get ready. Here's the third thing. Do not allow the way you feel to hinder the way you flow. I love, again, using a biblical example. Jesus was on a donkey, and this is only a week before his crucifixion. We often, call this Palm Sunday. And he's moving in, and everybody's happy and shouting and praising his name and lifting him up. And yet Jesus knew that donkey, that the end of that destiny was death. Jesus knew he was going to go to the cross. He knew that he was going to have to die for the sins of mankind. That was his destiny. He knew where this donkey was. It didn't matter the praises of the people or the few critics that came afterwards, the Pharisees who were saying, hey, get control of your crowd, Jesus. Jesus knew where the donkey was. Jesus stayed on the donkey, knowing where it was going to lead him. Right now, in knowing where your destiny is going to take you, I want to say this to you. Stay on your donkey. You're always going to have critics. There's always going to be someone that's going to tell you why you shouldn't be doing it, why you shouldn't be doing it, why it can't be done, why it should have never been started. Jesus said you'll always have the poor around you. I want to say this to preachers and business leaders. You'll always have critics around you. I remember the story of David one time when there was a coup. His son was trying to overthrow his kingdom, and David left the city with his servants and some of his family. And there's this one guy throwing rocks and cursing David, and some of the men, his soldiers, wanted to go out and kill this guy. And David said, no, let him alone. Let him alone. And the Bible says that David's esteem rose in the eyes of the people. David didn't take on every critic. If you're fighting every critic that's trying to tell you why it can't be done and why you shouldn't be doing it, you'll never get to the solution. You've got to ignore your critics and stay on the donkey, even if it's leading you to some bad stuff. Here's the fourth thing about focusing upon solutions rather than your past successes. Number 4, soul is more important than systems. Soul is more important than systems. Harley Davidson is not a motorcycle manufacturer. It's a lifestyle company. Just look at them. I mean, there's people that don't even know how to ride a Harley, that have got all the leather and the chains and the bandana, and the cool jacket. Why? They're selling a lifestyle. Nike doesn't sell shoes. Nike sells heroism. It chooses to advertise shoes with this emphasis upon you wear these shoes and this is you're going to feel like you're winning, that you're a winner. It is selling a winning attitude. And we've got to understand that in our business, I often go by Krispy Kreme, and I look for that hot sign. Come on, don't tell me you haven't done that. And man, when the hot sign's on, what is Krispy Kreme selling? Now, certainly they're selling those mouth-watering donuts that just, I mean, absolutely, with a good cup of coffee or milk, just melt in your mouth. But what they're really selling is a fulfillment of dream, of aspirations, a feeling of deep pleasure that you can't probably get there's nothing better than a Krispy Kreme donut. Think about Disney for a moment. What is Disney? They're not selling rides that you have to wait 2.5 hours in. They're selling magic, that feeling of being beyond yourself and entering into a world of make-believe. So what is the soul of your company? What is the core of your church? What is it? And don't say, well, it's Jesus if you're a pastor or some long mission statement if you're a business. But what is the actual adventure that you're calling? I do this with people all the time. I'm a pastor, as many of you know, been a pastor for over 40 years. And what I'm trying to get people to do is not just become a Christian, not just become a part of God's kingdom, but what I'm trying to call them to is a sense of adventure. I mean, you read the Bible, it's full of adventure, of just death-defying things that happen and miracles that take place. And man, if you were walking with Jesus or the Apostle Paul in the early days of man, it was one adventure after another. They pay big bucks these days to hire somebody to take them out on a vacation where they're put through the ringer to be able to say, I did that. I mean, climbing Mount Everest is one of the most grueling physical, emotional, mental challenges you can ever do in your life. People will pay $150,000 to pay a guide to take them up and down the mountain that you're only up on the summit for a few minutes and you have to come back down. Why? Because people crave adventure. So what is the core of adventure in your business or your church or your nonprofit? What is the heart of what you do? What is the grand story that makes up what you do? Because when it really comes down to it, stories are the only thing people are interested in today. You tell an inspirational story. You tell a story from your own personal life. You tell the story of someone who's overcome something that some of your people are going through. Man, people are rapt listeners listening to what you have to say. But you just quoting a bunch of facts. I mean, one of the most boring things in the world is going through a budget meeting where somebody's just going through all those numbers, man. My eyes glaze over. My eyebrows begin to fall out. My hair turns grayer. Why? Because there's no adventure in that. And while you've got to have that aspect to your company, that's not the heart of your company. It's not the heart of your church. It's not the core of why you do what you do. What is the core adventure story of the group that you lead? And when you find that story, man, you tell it over and over and over again. I wonder right now as we close up for today, when I think about my buddy Jimmy Buffett, I was raised in Florida and I think about his whole idea of Margaritaville, whether you agree with his whole lifestyle or not, you got to admit, this guy who's not the greatest singer in the world, and even though I love his music, it's not the most complex music that's ever been written. But man, he sold us the idea of a laid-back fun in the sun that so many of us yearn for in this hectic lifestyle that we live in. The core of his story was, you can have fun in the sun. What's your story? Can you write out your story in 25 words or less? Can you share with somebody in an elevator what the story of your company is, the story of your church, the story of your life? When you start giving away your story, that's when successes become forefront in your life. Hey, until next time, we'll see you at Surge Leadership.